Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie, and we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Hey, welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, and it is my joy to walk with you through Hebrews in our year-long study of the New Testament. Today, we are studying Hebrews 1. As always, you can follow along with the Behold studies in the Daily Grace Go shop or with the reading plan linked in the show notes. Before we start to get into the beauty of Hebrews 1, let's take a look at some of the context. First, who wrote the book of Hebrews? The funny thing is that we're not quite sure. The author and audience of this book have remained overall anonymous. There's been speculation from scholars that the author may be Luke, Paul, Timothy, Apollo, or others, but overall it still remains a mystery. Scholars have concluded through the context of the book that the author likely wrote to a group of persecuted Jewish Christians around AD 65. Why did the author of Hebrews pen this letter? The author wrote this to encourage his audience to carry faith with endurance, so that they would not return to their old ways of living. The author's overall goal in this book is to elevate the Son of God to his rightful place. He utilizes different means of comparison to show Jesus' superiority to important figures and customs the Jewish people have held on to. In the opening lines of Hebrews, the author gives us his thesis statement, or main point of the book. Verses 1 and 2 say, "Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors by the prophets at different times and in different ways. In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son." Here, the author is connecting Jesus to the Old Testament. The Jewish people used to hear from God through the prophets, but Jesus came on the scene as a new and greater mediator between the people and the Lord. The author heavily desired for his audience to truly understand Jesus and his identity. Without understanding the nature of the Son of God as God, how could people truly follow him? In this passage, the author writes that Jesus is the heir of all things, and that God made the universe through him. Jesus has already been around long before his birth to Mary in a manger. He was already there at the beginning of creation. The nature of the Son of God has been apparent to all of creation before creation ever began. These truths reveal that Jesus has the same attributes and abilities as God. Jesus is elevated as equal to God. He is not below God or lesser than God, but he is the exact expression of God's nature. The author wanted his audience to fully grasp that Jesus of Nazareth is God represented to us. If Hebrews' audience accepted the authority of God's prophets, how much more will they accept the authority of the Son of God? The author also calls Jesus the radiance of God's glory. Glory, and many times throughout Scripture, is connected to the idea of light. This imagery reminds us that Jesus radiates God's light to us, and that Jesus himself is the light of the world. In John 8:12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows after me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Jesus illuminates the light and path to those who follow him. He reflects God's glory onto his followers to guide and uplift them when they are in need of light. The group of Christians the author wrote to were likely in the midst of heavy persecution. They were likely scared that their faith would cause them harm to them or to others that they loved. Picture these people meeting in secret, for if they met in public, they would likely get arrested or punished. They communed together at night, quietly. They prayed together, worshiped together, and mourned the loss of martyr brothers and sisters together. Do you think that these people needed to be reminded of the light of the world in the midst of this darkness? Jesus was the light of their life and still remains the light of the world today. In this next section, the author begins to support his thesis through the use of Old Testament themes and figures. In chapters 1 and 2, he writes how Jesus is superior to angels. In the Jewish tradition, it was believed that angels gave Moses the law, known as the Old Covenant. There was an elevated status on these spiritual beings, and the author wanted his readers to fully understand that Jesus was not an angel, but far above them. The author pulls multiple Old Testament scriptures from the Psalms, from 2 Samuel, and Deuteronomy to show how God spoke about the Son of God. The intimate relationship God has with his Son is much different than the relationship that God has with his angels. The author displays, through his use of Old Testament literature, how Jesus is elevated, not just in the words of the apostles through the New Testament, but his elevation has been known since the beginning of time. The Old Testament points to Jesus' divine nature. Jesus is the light of the world and the light of our lives. He humbly took off his royal crown and put on a crown of thorns to reveal his deep affection for us, inviting us into the royal family as heirs of God. We behold Jesus today as the beginning and the end. We fixate our gaze upward onto Jesus as glorious. Rather than placing other things above him, we acknowledge that he has the right to be the heir of all things. Just like Jewish people could not find saving grace in the angels of God, we cannot expect salvation from the things we find valuable in this world. Our families, our friends, our incomes, our opportunities, our material possessions, none of these will provide saving grace. Our beholding Jesus looks like believing that he is worthy of his place at the right hand of God. He is sitting at the right hand of God, and his posture of sitting shows that the work of salvation has been completed. There is nothing you nor I need to achieve in order to be saved. He has already fulfilled the sacrifice to purify us perfectly. It is finished. We trust in his sacrifice for us as the one thing that can truly wipe us clean. Today, let us behold Christ as the light of the world. He remains the light that heals the dark crevices within our heart. He lights the path we walk and reminds us that we do not walk in difficulty alone. Let us behold him as the beginning and the end. Let us behold him as our true saving grace, who remains above all things now and forevermore.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.